Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. America was the strongest, most secure democracy in the world. That is no longer true because of the last 3 months under Trump. But the question I want to answer in this video is whether SCOTUS, particularly Chief Justice John Roberts, can save our democracy from Trump. Now, here's why I ask. In a recent public interview, Chief Justice John Roberts sent another warning shot at Donald Trump. It was a rebuke, you could say. Now, this isn't the first time. You might remember back in 2018, Roberts publicly rebuked Trump for calling a federal judge an Obama judge. And he also responded, "We do not have Obama judges or Trump judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best." Do you remember that? That was rare. A sitting Chief Justice directly correcting the President of the United States. But this time, Roberts went further. He didn't just respond to an insult. He defended the very foundation of our judicial system. And in doing so, he sent a clear message. That message is the Supreme Court does not work for Donald Trump. Now, let's hear exactly what he had to say.
I think most judges would agree that judicial independence is crucial. You agree? What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's central. The only real political science innovation in our Constitution, I mean, you know, parliaments have been around for 800 years and obviously executives, is the establishment of an independent judiciary. Even places you think are similar to ours, like England. The judiciary in England was part of Parliament. I mean, they sat in the House of Lords, and because Parliament was supreme. But in our Constitution, judges and the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government, separate from the others, with the authority to interpret the Constitution as law and strike down, obviously, acts of Congress or acts of the president. And that innovation doesn't work if it's not, the judiciary is not independent. Its job is to obviously decide cases, but in the course of that, check the excesses of Congress or of the executive, and that does require a degree of independence.
All right, so you heard it. And it was pretty strong. So let's talk about, first of all, judicial independence, or what could be described as America's firewall against authoritarianism. Roberts called judicial independence the only true innovation in the Constitution. And he was not exaggerating. That's a fact. Because in Britain, judges answered to the king. In France, they answered to the state. But in America, the framers did something totally different. They created an independent court system, one that doesn't answer to Congress and doesn't answer to the president. That's the only way the system works. Judges must be free from political pressure. Because when a president tries to control the courts, you no longer have a democracy. You have a dictatorship. So he also talked about the fact that the government, our government, consists of co-equal branches, not a presidential rule. Okay? He made it clear. He said the 3 branches of government are equal. That means the courts are not beneath the president. The president is not the boss of judges, and judges are not Trump's employees. That's a direct rebuke of Trump's authoritarian thinking. Trump wants loyalty. He wants obedience. Roberts is saying, we don't work for you, sir. Now, let's talk about something else Roberts mentions, and that is the separation of powers. And basically that means that he's saying we're not submitting. This is not about submission. All right, so he talked about equality first. He talked about separation. The Supreme Court isn't part of Congress, and it sure isn't part of the White House. This separation is the backbone of the Constitution. It was intentionally the framers of the country and the folks who literally wrote the Constitution intentionally made it to stop kings, autocrats, and folks who want to establish an authoritarian government. So when Roberts highlights that separation, he's reminding Trump in very clear terms, and he's reminding the public that power must be divided or it becomes tyrannical. Roberts says something else. He said courts must also check abuse of power. Wow. I mean, this is a clear, bold rebuke. All this happened last night. He gave these remarks, I believe it was last night. And that also is very critical, that folks understand, that Trump understands, that MAGA understands, that the court system can indeed check an abuse of power. So he says SCOTUS interprets the Constitution, but in doing that, SCOTUS also must check the excesses of Congress and the president. That's their job, not to please the president, not to advance a party's agenda, but to check their power when they go too far. Again, that is a direct message to Trump. And then Roberts brought it all home with this. He said impeachment is not how you register disagreement with judges' decisions. And you remember he did that because Trump and MAGA was talking about impeaching judges that disagree with them. Where Roberts made it clear, that's not what you do. Instead, you appeal their decisions. Now, Roberts was not just giving a civics lesson here. No. He was talking to Trump and his allies. And these allies and Trump and MAGA and so forth, they want to punish judges for merely doing their jobs. And Roberts is warning them, you don't get to bully the judiciary into submission. Now, Roberts went on to embrace something we call originalism. And this is when judges interpret the Constitution based on their understanding of what the original intent of the law is. So let's listen to another clip. I want you to hear that as well.
So lots of decisions that you make interpreting the Constitution have real-life practical consequences. So just as for example, the Second Amendment decisions result in more people having guns. And the Obamacare decision resulted in more people having health insurance. Obergefell resulted in more same-sex marriages. Do you think about those practical consequences when you're interpreting the Constitution? And should justices think about those practical consequences when they're interpreting the words of the Constitution?
Mainly no to both of those questions. Because if you do that, with one exception I'll talk about later, but if you do that, you're kind of putting yourself in the place of the legislator. You can say, for example, a consequence of the Second Amendment decisions are, well, more people have guns, and so there's more accidental shootings, more shootings. Or you can say the consequence is that more people are armed and therefore they're in a better position if there's foreign invasion, as there was with the British shortly after the adoption of the Second Amendment, so that's a good thing. Now, if you decide one of those or the other based on your view of what you think is best, you would be substituting your own view for that of the people who wrote the Constitution. So, no, I don't think that's not a big part of at least how I do my job, sort of what a purposivist approach is what people would call that, because I think you're making yourself the arbiter of what people were trying to accomplish in that law, when you really need to be doing is sitting down and reading it, in its appropriate context and trying to figure out what they meant.
Yeah.
Now, at one extreme, if an interpretation you adopt leads to some absurd result that nobody could plausibly have intended, then the consequences make a difference. But I think it's more important to figure out what the people who wrote the law had in mind and what they meant by the words they used, rather than think, what is this type of legislation for?
All right. Now, let me say this about originalism. It's a double-edged sword. And I typically don't embrace originalism. I think laws written 300 years ago by enslavers should be scrutinized closely and rejected if they violate God's word. But Roberts believes the Constitution should be interpreted based on the framers' original meaning or original intent. And that may sound noble, especially when it comes to checking Trump. And in theory, it should help stop authoritarianism. After all, the framers feared centralized power, where all the power in the government rests within one branch or with one person. So they built a system designed to prevent that. That was something they absolutely did not want to get into. I mean, think about it. They left the king behind in Britain. They wrote, "We the people," not "I the president." So if Roberts really believes in originalism, he should oppose Trump's power grabs, right? But here's the contradiction. Here is the contradiction. Can Roberts be trusted? And also, he only has one vote, just like the rest of them. And oftentimes, he has used that vote in anti-black ways. But I've raised this doubt because in Trump versus United States, Roberts authored the opinion granting Trump absolute immunity for official acts. And that wasn't the only time he shielded Trump from accountability. Roberts also wrote the majority opinion in Trump versus Anderson, where the court ruled that states cannot disqualify Trump from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, despite the fact that Trump, it is argued, inspired an insurrection. I mean, many people argue that Trump's role in January 6th was a key factor in all that going down. Nevertheless, Roberts wrote the opinion which said that only Congress can enforce Section 3, effectively stripping states of any power to disqualify federal candidates. So now, because of Roberts, Trump stayed on the ballot, and thanks to Roberts again, Trump has criminal immunity for official acts. So again, I ask, can he be trusted? Because that is definitely not judicial restraint. And also, I think that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the original intent, was in fact to keep someone like Trump from running for the presidency. Okay? So we also have to talk about Roberts' track record regarding civil rights. He clerked for William Rehnquist, a Chief Justice who fought against civil rights at every turn for decades. And Roberts followed that same path. He wrote the decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act. He helped destroy affirmative action. He's ruled consistently against racial equality. So he talks like a neutral referee who calls balls and strikes. That's what he said at his confirmation hearing. But his rulings have hurt Black progress for decades. So when he talks about protecting the system, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that he will save the country from Trump. I'm just not convinced. Okay? Now, let's ask the real question here. Will he refer back to originalism? Will he think about the independence and the separation of power and all of that? Or will he tolerate authoritarianism for the purpose of preserving white power? In my view, many white conservatives are fine with authoritarianism as long as it maintains their grip on power. That's what this is about. Power. And you do remember Trump even thanked Roberts during his most recent State of the Union address. Why? Well, I think because Roberts has been very useful. He's been very useful to the MAGA agenda. But let's suppose I'm wrong. Let's assume that Roberts truly believes in judicial independence. Let's assume he wants to really, truly check Trump's power. He really want to do what he said in this chit-chat that he had with this other judge. Then the question becomes, what happens if Trump doesn't listen to SCOTUS? Because there's a good chance Trump won't. Right? He's already hinted at ignoring the court, especially in cases like birthright citizenship or the Garcia deportation case. You remember in the Garcia deportation case, SCOTUS told the Trump administration to facilitate his return. But they also questioned whether the lower court could order Trump to effectuate that return. And that ambiguity gave Trump room to stall. And that's exactly what he's doing. But the real test, I believe, is coming. The real test will come when Trump has to make a decision to either defy the court on something that is really key to MAGA's agenda or to obey the court. So what happens if Trump says, basically, I don't care what Roberts says, I'm doing it anyway? That's when we will know where we are as a nation. So here's the final word. John Roberts says a lot of the right things in this chat. He talks about judicial independence, separation of powers, abuse of power, originalism, and so on. But when it mattered the most, he gave Trump big constitutional wins, including keeping him on the ballot. Those decisions will haunt this court, I believe, for decades. And the next time Trump crosses the line, we'll see whether Roberts is a guardian of the Constitution, a defender of democracy, or whether he will end up being just an unfortunate footnote in the collapse of our democracy. We got to wait and see, and we will not have to wait long. All right, thank you for watching this video. I am Reverend Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett, and always remember, stay woke.